So we head into our fourth and final panel of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference 2022. So I will move straight into panel 4 in the interest of time. And this panel is entitled Planning for a Just Future. We have in the past few days examined some of the challenges and discussed what we would like to see in the region. And on this panel, we will go a bit more in depth. We have a multidisciplinary panel, so they're bringing their perspectives from different backgrounds about how we can chart a pathway to a sustainable and resilient future for the Caribbean where gender equity is centered. So I will now introduce our moderator for this evening's discussion, Ms. Alicia M. Richens. So Alicia is a sustainability and social impact consultant based in Toronto, but she's originally a Trini, I must point out, and is a fierce advocate of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As a consultant, she works with forward-thinking organizations to translate the global framework to the local context. As the partnerships and standards lead at the Common Approach to Impact Measurement, Alicia leads the development and adoption of the Common Approach's 4 flexible standards for impact measurement. She also serves as Director of Programming for Leading Change Canada, an organization focused on activating youth sustainability leadership for the transition to a low-carbon economy within a generation. A dual citizen since birth of Canada and Trinidad and Tobago, Alicia holds a Master's in Environmental Studies, Planning Concentration, and a BA in Economics and Social Science honors, both from York University. Let's welcome our moderator for this afternoon, Ms. Alicia M. Richens. Over to you, Alicia.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Derval. As you said, originally and always a Trini, it is so great to get to connect with these powerhouses of Caribbean people that I'm about to get into conversation with. And we have quite a big panel today. So instead of me reading off their very well-earned long bios, I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. I really appreciated the conversation earlier about respecting Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nations, Indigenous sovereignty and leadership. And I also want to acknowledge that today I'm joining you virtually from Vancouver, Canada, traditionally home to the Coast Salish peoples, and that we all take a moment to reflect on the Indigenous peoples across the Caribbean who we have been taught to forget or imagine that they were removed and annihilated, as well as the Indigenous peoples that many of us descend from, who were brought to the Caribbean either through enslavement or indentureship. So to get started today, I am going to hand the floor over first to Ms. Kendria Ferguson, who is a native of the Bahamas and a professional in marine biology. I'll hand it over to you, Kendria, to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work and how it intersects with gender and climate justice.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Yes, like you mentioned, I'm from the Bahamas. I started off in marine biology and gradually moved into many things, sustainable development, energy, and currently I'm doing my PhD with the University of West Indies, focused on the socio-economic impact of Hurricane Dorian. So for me right now, the intersection with gender really comes from the social aspect, understanding the social dynamics of natural disasters, how our communities and households from national and local level are able to respond, prepare, and recover from disasters. And from that, we're definitely seeing that women are definitely more impacted by hurricanes or other disasters in the region than their men are. So that's a lot of where the gender is coming from in my studies.
Thank you very much, Kendria. Over to you, Khadija, who is the founder of Ecovybz Environmental Creatives and the Caribbean Regional Representative for the Sustainable Ocean Alliance.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. So yes, as mentioned, I am the founder of Ecovybz Environmental Creatives, a company focused on environmental storytelling, working at the intersection of climate change, water resources, and marine resources. And I'm also the regional rep for Sustainable Ocean Alliance, international NGO working on providing young people with the tools and solutions to tackle our ocean's biggest problems. And for me, the way I see gender, especially in the fields that I operate in, is as when you think of the ocean, water, climate change, all these things, like woman is the last thing that come to your mind, especially a young woman of color being from the Caribbean. And with all the work that I am doing, I'm really trying to increase representation and to let other young women know that, hey, this is something that I can do. This is a field where I can thrive, and it just doesn't have to be male dominated or follow the norms or your traditions that you're accustomed to. So I'm just here to provide the tools, the resources, the pathways to help other young people find their voice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to hand it over to Anate Mills. Anate, please correct me if I mispronounced your name in any way. But Anate is an energy and climate change and climate finance consultant who's worked with the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and various governments across Latin America and the Caribbean. She's also the co-founder of the Panamanian-based Ithaca Solutions. Over to you, Anate. Oh, I'm sorry, Anate is actually not here. So we are going to move right over there and hopefully she's able to join us later. I'm going to hand it over to Alicia Wallace, my namesake today. Really great to meet you, Alicia. I'm from the Bahamas. Alicia is a queer Black feminist gender expert and research consultant. Over to you, Alicia.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. It's very unusual to be in a space with another Alicia and with another Bahamian, so very special day. I am the director of Equality Bahamas, where we promote women's and LGBTQI plus people's rights as human rights, and I'm pretty new to the climate space. We have done a number of donations and donation collections for people who were impacted by hurricanes in the Bahamas, and Hurricane Dorian was just so catastrophic that we kind of upscaled that and ran a complete distribution center. And that is where I realized that, okay, I can't keep being afraid of science and ignoring climate and leaving that to other people to do, because climate justice is gender justice and vice versa. So pretty new to this space. I won't be talking about anything science, but talking lots about gender.
I mean, I think we need science as much as we need gender, so don't hide away from that at all. Thank you so much. And it turns out that Anate is here. She was just hiding in the attendee section, and now we have her over as a panelist. Like I said, over to you, Anate.
Hi, let me see if I can see myself here. I am hiding, and now I'm like.
Now you're a little upside down, but we see you.
Let me try to fix that. Anyways, well, thank you, ladies. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here in this group of amazing women. And this morning, I have been enjoying the program very much so. So thank you so much for this invitation. To me and to my co-founder of Ithaca Solutions, Laura Canevari, who is also in the audience today. We are very excited. As mentioned, I come from working in sustainable development. I'm a sustainable development professional. I've been working with the multilateral development banks world and the public sector in Jamaica. I've been honored to being part of the Office of the Prime Minister team and the Climate Change Division team in Jamaica, working in several fronts of climate action. I am now doing also my master's in climate change and development, focused on integrating climate risk into public investment. I think where I see also climate injustice very much so, Laura will also agree with me, is in the way that decisions are being taken on how the allocation of climate finance is happening in our region. We are not getting the opportunity to take decisions around climate finance, around where it's going, where it's allocated, how is it used, how is it prioritized, especially in rebuilding our countries after disasters. We are seeing that communities are not being invited to the conversation, invited to the decision-taking process, and much less women are not being part of this process or not consistently being part of this process like it should be. Ithaca Solutions is an organization, a service provider that is focused on that type of empowering women, communities, men also, and young people, children even, in that decision process. Because when we build back better, we need to take the people who need to rebuild in charge and take them and empower them to be in charge of that rebuilding process. So I'm looking forward to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much. I hope we get you over here on video soon, but we're all equally excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Danielle Nemhard, who is a marine scientist and environmental consultant. Over to you, Danny.
Hi, everyone. Just want to say, first off, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I've been able to attend a number of the other panels so far, and honestly, the energy that I'm getting from the participants and the speakers is just so overwhelming in terms of the direction of climate justice in the Caribbean, and the fact that our voices matter and our voices are important, that we can speak for ourselves and find our own solutions. So thank you so much for this. Yes, I'm a marine scientist by, I guess, education. By practice, I am many other things like my panelist Kendria over here. I worked as an environmental consultant with a firm in Kingston, where we focused a lot on environmental assessments, climate mitigation adaptation strategies, disaster risk management. We did work with multilaterals, with development banks, private sector, as well as the government. From there, I worked with an environmental non-government organization in Jamaica, mainly focused, my project was focused on Cockpit country, which many would know as a very ecologically and culturally important area that's under threat from the impacts of mining, which has its own human rights and climate justice, subtopics that we could get into. And now I've been granted a scholarship, thankfully, to James Cook University in Australia to pursue my PhD in society and culture. For me, working at the human environment interface, I kind of realized that, okay, yes, we do have a lot of physical science knowledge and we have a lot of ecological science knowledge, but we need to delve more into the social science and the psychosocial and cognitive behavioral, because really the environment, honestly, on its own is going to be okay. It's that interaction with people and how they use these resources that's kind of causing all of these problems that we're having these days. I'm going to try to focus, my work will still focus on coral reef communities. I'm going to try to focus on risk perception and intersectionality through my work that I've done as a consultant and even as with an ENGO. You witness firsthand how gender, how intersectionality can shape how people experience and engage with these intervention programs and policies, whether it is for restoration or what they call resilience building or reducing vulnerability. And so, I want to kind of use these concepts of environmental and climate justice, of intersectionality, of risk perception to what it's going to be with the Great Barrier Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. But what I'm hoping to do is, come out with a framework or a number of frameworks where we can now more meaningfully engage communities and stakeholders when we're looking into these restoration interventions, instead of doing parachute science where we jump in and assume what people want or think we know what people want based on the ecological and physical sciences rather than their experiential experiences, their experiences. So I'm still in the beginning stages of this doctorate. I haven't even gotten to Australia yet. So, but that's hopefully where I'm going to take it. And I see obviously gender as a very critical intersection, because we know that women typically in many sectors tend to have restricted access to information, and they are not necessarily included in the decision-making process. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Thank you again for having me.
Wonderful. We're so glad to have you with us, Danny. And rounding us out, we decided we're going to include a male perspective in the panel. I'm really excited to introduce Mr. Joshua Fredericks, who's also here representing the Wapichan peoples of what we currently call Guyana. Over to you, Joshua. Joshua's not here. I know he's had some technical difficulties with internet access in his village, so hopefully he is able to join us at least over audio at some point in today's conversation. So let's get into it. I know you've all in your introductions, alluded a lot to the importance of gender equality in creating a sustainable and resilient future, but let's get into it in a little bit more detail. What has been some of the progress made so far that you've seen, and how do you see that critical connection between gender equality and sustainability? Maybe we'll start with you again, Kendria.
Thanks. Yeah, when I was presented the questions and the question came up, what progress have we made? And it was honestly a struggle to answer that because like Danny mentioned, there's very few women in decision-making processes or in places where they could be at the table, particularly in government. So when it comes to understanding what progress we've made in terms of integrating women and providing protection needed for women and young girls and children so that we could build resilient communities, I honestly don't think the Caribbean has made much strides in that. And that may be a harsh reality, but I think it really needs to be discussed. For us in the Bahamas, and particularly with my work with Hurricane Dorian, I'm really seeing the gaps that exist between women and men when it comes to natural disasters or even disaster recovery. So when we talk about policies, we're not providing enough protection in terms of social assistance programs. And this can be seen obviously during the COVID era as well. We're not giving our women the support that they need in communities to be able to recover and to adjust to what's going on globally. So it's really difficult to pinpoint what progress we've made. I've seen some countries make some women essential needs like sanitary products and those sort of things to reduce VAT or taxes on those things. And I think those are very progressive and very much needed throughout the region. But when we really talk about providing climate assistance and ensuring that women and children and even some men, to be honest, because we do have single-headed households that are ran by men, and there are some inconsistencies on the male side of it. When it comes to really having those tools and policies and programs in place that can really support both genders, I think we're really missing the ball game on this one. Like, we're really very much so behind the rest of the world. So I honestly I could not think of a positive program or a positive change that we've made, because I always feel like when we make one step forward, we make like 20 more steps back. So yeah, that was very much so my thought on that.
Thank you so much, Kendria. And as we get into the conversation, audience, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll definitely make sure we make time to get to them. I'll hand it over to you, Khadija. What progress do you see, or how do you see that importance between gender equality and sustainability?
Well, I share the same sentiments as Kendria. When I saw that question, I was like, wow, progress, does that exist? I feel like we are still in ancient times when it comes to like gender equality and stuff in the Caribbean. And I found a quote, and I'm reading it. It says, if you're invisible in everyday life, your needs would not be thought of, let alone addressed in your crisis situation. And I feel like that's where we as women stand, as youth and stuff stand in this whole climate change space. But at the same time, I don't want to discredit the work that some people are doing on the ground, because there are organizations. I mean, look at the space that exists right now for us, like something that's like this we would not have seen before. And there are more spaces like this coming forward for women to lend their voices, but it's not enough, because this is not at the decision-making level. This is not at the level where it matters the most. And I feel like, I don't want to, like, it's very overwhelming and stuff for me to think about it, especially as a young woman, because I have found myself in spaces so many times where I have felt so small, so unbelievable small and unrecognized, especially as probably the only young woman from the Caribbean being in that space and struggling and fighting to let my voice be heard internationally and regionally. And it's just like, but aren't we past that stage? Like, how is this still my reality in 2022, you know? And progress-wise, I think we really need to work on shifting that mindset and that perspective that gender equality does exist, because I was doing some reading and it was saying that because women have access to education, that technically a lot of people feel like gender equality exists. It's thriving, it's functioning because we have access to the resources, right? But do we really? And if we do have access, are we really making an impact with that access? Are we really getting the roles that is needed for us? Most women in the region have things like administrative roles, whereas you have the men are the ones that coming up with the projects, leading the projects. They're the ones on the technical side of things. They're the ones drafting the laws, drafting the policies, and we just there, yeah, looking cute, probably providing some insight in the background. And I feel like that's still where we are, and we have a very, very, very long road to go. But conversations like this, more spaces like this, is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think a lot about the fact that, you know, most of our scholarship winners are women, most of our degree holders in the region are women, but we don't see that reflected in, you know, positions of power. And we have, you know, organizations like the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator that likes to position, you know, the Caribbean and small island developing states as incubators for climate action and climate innovation. Yet, as you said, if people are invisible at the start of it, then how are they going to be actually included as part of that? I'm going to hand it over to you, Anate. How do you weigh in on this?
I have to say that I do see progress. I see progress in my screen right now, in each of you. I see progress in creating spaces. In many people are connected to this call and to this webinar today and all these days. I do think that there is not a limit. I would say there's a lot of empowered women in the Caribbean. There's a lot. Where I agree with Khadija is whether it's enough, whether it's enough in those spaces where you really need to take decisions. And that's where I think the challenge remains. It's still a very patriarchal, you know, space, the climate. And you see it when you go to a climate conference, COP. I don't know if some of you have had that opportunity. It's a man's world still. I can totally relate to that feeling of becoming invisible when you are, you know, surrounded by so many men. Not that these men are not taking good decisions or, you know, are probably brilliant men with good backgrounds, but we are not enough. And when it comes to mobilizing climate finance, for example, and getting that climate finance to the communities, really and truly the ones that end up implementing the practical solutions are women. So there's a disconnection and it's disjointed, absolutely. But I do see progress. And for example, with Ithaca Solutions, in terms of my co-founder, Laura, and myself, we come from working with public and private sector and working for MDVs and specialized consultancy firms. And you know, you could say a really good, nice breadth of experience, you know, a lot of learning in methodologies, best practices all over Latin America and the Caribbean. And then, you know, we were still, you know, when we will sit down just to exchange notes with Laura when we were doing our networking back in the day before we decided to set up Ithaca, we were like, this is not working. We are still not feeling like we're doing things. And that's, I think, one of the reasons where, we decided to set up Ithaca, step away from these very important spaces and set up our own women-led organization, a little organization. We're entrepreneurs, but we step out and we created it. And we felt that we also needed to be different as consultants, because we came from the multilateral development world and the private sector, where you think that you have all the answers, and you're you learn to have this thinking of MDBs that yes, we know what we're doing. We're coming to you to tell you how it's done, and then we realize no, that's not really how it happens. It's all the way around. You really have to go to the communities, sit with the people, learn how things are being done, and really start creating those solutions and matching those solutions to what they want, what the communities want, and how they want to do it. And then you apply your technical expertise, whatever you want to call it, on climate risk, climate adaptation, adaptation strategies, but you are the one that you integrate that knowledge into what's already established in the communities. And so it's a more collaborative approach. That is not happening, or not happen. Women are not, sitting at those tables enough. And that's something that we promote at Ithaca, that community-led organization and action. But you always hear community-led, and what does that really mean? And when it comes to action on the ground, when you are rebuilding after a disaster, it's not only about physical infrastructure. It's about transferring knowledge to the communities for disaster risk management, for preparing resilience, taking a proactive approach into where are going to have food banks, or where are the shelters, who is going, and how those shelters are going to be managed. That kind of thinking needs to happen before, and women need to be driving or be part of the drivers of those decisions, instead of taking that putting off fires approach that governments take just after the disaster, coming with multilaterals and funders and international companies to tell the people how to rebuild their little houses, still in the same vulnerable areas. And Laura has seen it. Our experience, it came from Hurricane Iota, that I don't know if you heard that it hit the island of Providencia. Providencia is a Colombian, it's part of the Colombian, from the Colombian government. But can you imagine being hit in your island, a Caribbean island, by all concepts, and that decisions on how you rebuild your island are taken in a landlocked country in Bogota by a central government? And they were abandoned. And it was sad to see how, even if you are, connected to these countries or landlocked countries, Puerto Rico is another example. Everybody says, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Is it? So let me stop right there and see what everybody else has to say.
I love those points so much. I think it goes back to an earlier comment that Danny made around, really leaning into people's lived experiences and letting them lead from the community level versus having this very top-down approach that we have from our colonial history, let's call it what it is, where, either other countries tell our countries what to do, or our governments tell our local communities what to do. What do you see as key to this in driving progress? And I'm going to throw that over to you, Alicia, in your experience with Equality Bahamas.
Yeah, we've seen some progress, but of course it's not as much as we would like to see. And to get to that level, we really need to be using the tools and the resources that are available to us. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about what we don't have and underusing what we do have. So one of the things that we've been looking at in Equality Bahamas is international mechanisms. So really focusing a lot on, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. We know that as the Women's Rights Bill. And it's not often used to talk about climate justice, but there are connections there. And the CEDAW committee is recognizing those connections. So it's really on the state as well as civil society, the people who are producing shadow reports for the CDOC committee to review, to highlight some of these issues. And they're going to come up in various spaces, right? So following Hurricane Dorian, even in the face of the pandemic, we've seen the effects on education. We've seen the effects on health, access to healthcare, particularly for women and girls. And these are the things that we need to be thinking about, these intersections, these really real life experiences that people have. So while we ran this distribution center following Hurricane Dorian, we did that for about 6 months, serving 200 or more families every week. One of the things that we noticed very early on was that it was women coming in. Women coming in, not just to get help for themselves, they're coming in for their households and for their family members that are maybe busy looking for jobs and can't come in for themselves. They're coming in with lists, and they're coming in with these lists, not on pieces of paper, it's all up here, because women hold the knowledge of the family and of the household and of the community. They would come in and they would say, this is the size that I need for my children. These are the things that I need for my husband. This is the waist size and the length of his pants. And then my sister, she wasn't able to make it, but her husband also needs this. And then they have 2 boys, and then she has a little baby girl, and they have all this information. They know exactly what they need. Very few times we saw men come in. It was far more rare than women coming in. And when they came in, they kind of knew, like, yeah, we need food. We need a couple supplies, we need some baby stuff. And then I'd say, what about menstrual hygiene products? Is anyone in your household menstruating? Yes, okay, great. Does the person prefer pads or tampons? No idea, no clue. Women are the people who hold this knowledge and who share it and who use it to access the resources that everyone else needs. So this is just one example of how climate justice is gender justice, and how we can start thinking about some of these issues as the same. In the face of disaster, in the face of trying to recover, it is women who are doing the care work. It's women who are taking care of the domestic sphere. It's women who, because you're crashing at your friend's place, you're the one who's doing the housework because the friend is saying, yeah, you can stay here, but you gotta help because you brought 4 extra people into my household, right? These are the things that we have to look at. And these are the ways that we have to consider international mechanisms and looking at what the state is doing. What is the government doing about this burden that is now on women, and in addition on girls, who are often school-age girls, but are made to be parents, are made to be adults, are made to care for their younger siblings, because again, they're being taught that they're supposed to hold this knowledge and they're supposed to take care of the younger people in the family. So when we think about this nexus of gender equality and climate justice, we have to constantly be thinking about people's lived experiences, and also thinking about the fact that women are not a homogenous group. So we have women, for example, who have disabilities. So that's going to affect the way that they show up for help. That's going to affect the kind of help that they need. We have women who are queer, who might not be comfortable coming in with their partner to get help, or saying that they need additional supplies because it's the same gender partner in their household who they're also looking out for. There are, women with different levels of education, different class levels, different races. And one of the things that we saw in the Bahamas, women who are migrants, women who have different status, right? Who are undocumented or who are documented, but because they lost everything, they can't prove it. So when they go to other places to get help, they're being turned away. Because you can't prove to me where you're from, you can't prove to me where you used to live, or that you survived this storm. There are all these things that we have to be thinking about constantly, and progress isn't just about seeing gender equality, woo, in stars. It's about taking those learnings and using them to develop better policies and to create better laws.
Yes, yes to everything that you said, basically, I think it's so important for us to recognize not just the way that women physically are the ones on the front lines protecting climate and protecting our, sustainable futures, but just the emotional care labor in the recovery process of those impacts. And how do we, in the short term, better resource them, but in the long term, actually remove that burden? I will throw it over to you, Danny, to round us out.
I just want to say copy paste of everything that all the other panelists have just said, because Yeah, facts, accuracy. I mean, we need to do things at, the level of legislation and policy, both on a regional scale, an international scale, and a local scale. Right now, I think gender, they talk about mainstreaming gender, right? It's kind of a box ticking exercise, I fear, based on the experiences I've had working as a consultant. You get a terms of reference, you get a scope of work, and it just says, be gender inclusive, be socially inclusive, without actually going into what that framework might look like, what those steps might look like. And the good thing is that there are mechanisms in place for us to really, as I said, meaningfully engage these intersectional groups that Alicia would have pointed out in her thing. But another important step is it has to be transformative, right? So we talk about gender equality, and bringing women up to the level of, where men are, and, equal pay and equal rights and so on and so forth. But in thinking about the transformation, it has to involve men as well, right? Because they hold a lot of power, they hold a lot of access. And what we really need to do is get, I hate to use the word allyship, but I'm going to use it, allyship from there, because they hold a key part to play in transforming these unequal norms and these power relations and structures and imbalances that are hindering our progress. So it's kind of like a shifting baseline, right? So where we started is not where we are. So now we need to develop new indicators of success, new targets, new goals on how to really gain this transformative gender approach, right? We can't be using what we were using 20 years ago and 30 years ago now that the world is continuously changing. And yes, we always have to have that intersectional lens. We have to move beyond just reaching and trying to benefit groups, but we're trying to empower everyone in this conversation as we progress, right? So yes, you can reach them. They can be in the room when you're making the decision. That doesn't mean that they are part of the decision, okay? So they are involved in the decision-making process. That doesn't mean that they're capable of making that decision on their own. So we have to sensitize, educate, empower, all of these things, again, through this intersectional lens. Have we made progress? Absolutely, yes, we have. There are, as I said, a lot of mechanisms in place, a lot of international agreements and legislation in place that we can leverage. Do we have a long way to go? Too long. Do we have a lot of time? Not really. That's it.
Again, copy paste. Amen. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think, in summing up all of your responses, like, we haven't made as much progress. There's so much work left to be done. But I want to reiterate Anati's point, like, being in this virtual space with you, having these faces around this table, like the goosebumps and the chills I feel now being here with you, like, that's such a great marker of that progress. And basically, we just need more power ourselves and resources around this table, and we'll have a lot of those challenges dealt with and solved. So next, I want to kind of take us looking forward. So in each of your sectors, each of the industries that you work in, if we were to get all that work done that we know needs to happen, what does it look like? What are the expected outcomes if we actually were to center gender in our climate work and in each of your sectors? And this time I'm going to do it more popcorn style. So whoever feels called, unmute and jump in.
I'll be, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kendria.
For me, in the industry of, I guess, climate change and environmental shocks, for us to be more gender-centered, that means that we will have policies and strategies that are adaptable and flexible. And what I mean by that is that we understand our community needs and we understand the roles of people within our community. And to Alicia's point, where women are really at the forefront of the home, what we saw during disasters and even during COVID, and I'll focus on the COVID aspect, women were expected to work from home, as well as become the home teacher, as well as, find a way to find employment if they were laid off, plus be a home teacher, plus still put food on the table and do all these other caregiving needs. So for us, if we can put gender at the center of disaster response or climate or economic shocks, then we understand the role that women play in society, and we can develop programs that support that. What we saw during Dorian is that with the social protection programs that we have, there was never a social protection program that provided assistance in the face of a disaster. So you typically see government struggling to pull finances from other areas. So they're going to cut education, you know, they're going to cut food assistance to people that were already on the program, or they're going to cut household assistance to people that were already on the program to cater to the needs of the families that are now in desperate need of it. So if we can tackle gender, then we can really look at what are some of the social issues that exist in our country. And then we can really start to develop programs that can, you know, fit those issues throughout a normal year without any disasters, and then also be able to shift those programs to be able to respond to disasters when needed. For us, and I think for the rest of the Caribbean, if we really focus on strengthening access and support for women, especially when it comes to education, healthcare is a major one that we're definitely struggling in, home assistance, and mental health assistance. I think once we get those things going, then we can definitely build resilient communities, especially on a community level, because we know as Caribbean people, once our community needs help, everybody steps in and help each other. I think you begin to really strengthen those community networks, and that then triggers or that is then equated into stronger countries. So we really need to tackle those community issues and strengthen those networks that exist. And that's how we can really build resilient communities throughout the region.
Thank you very much, Kendria. Who else has thoughts about expected outcomes when we get this done well?
All right, so I'm going to jump in. I raised my hand, but I'm just going to talk. Honestly, for me, again, a lot of my work is in, you know, ecological interventions, restoration and conservation programs. What I want to see is where those programs and the systems that support those programs, and I'll reiterate, they challenge the underlying gender norms, relations, structures that underpin inequalities, right? So when we're talking about how society says men and women should behave, what specific roles they should play, how society values men versus women. And then we take, again, the intersections from there with disabilities, with queerness, with race, with class, etc. And basically any intervention, you know, that is going to be implemented in any particular coral reef community, coastal community, any community really, is going to challenge these underlying structural causes of gender inequality and place it in this transformation box. So once we transform, we're not going back, right? So we would have addressed a lot of those issues of inequality from the roots, as opposed to as a, you know, kind of facade.
Yeah, I wanted to come in because I cringe every time I hear about the creation of more policy or more regulation. I think we don't need more policies, and we're studied out in the Caribbean. We know what the social issues are. We know where the gaps are. What we really need to, and this is something that I agree with you, Dani, about those mechanisms or those resources that go to communities that are gender responsive. For example, if we have a cash transfer mechanism, you know, we know that after a disaster, people need money, and people need money to buy food, to rebuild houses, to get, you know, first emergency kits, medication. You know, it's just plain chaos everywhere, right? And in order to get those cash transfers, there's programs in the Caribbean that offer social protection. Are those programs really responsive of the realities of women on the ground? And are those requirements, let's say there's a cash transfer, there's cash transfers that are, you know, provided to women. What are the requirements? What do women have to, the conditionalities that they talk about, right? Because the banks and the finances institutions, they need monitoring, they need indicators, they need, you know, proof that you are spending the money where you're supposed to be spending it. And then, you know, that as a woman, you know, you're just doing a lot of things at the same time. There's a lot of conditionalities. Should conditionalities exist for example, cash transfers, or there shouldn't exist? Or what kind of conditionalities are women in Caribbean communities willing to accept that will inform top to bottom the social protection programs, for example. And that's where, again, we come back to what Khadija was saying, decision process. Are we being involved in that decision process of informing these programs? Or are we just accepting what the government can, give us whenever they feel like they want to give it, or whenever, the donor finally decides that, this is a good time to give you the finance. That's where I see, still the challenge, and how can we as women really lead that proactively, that you could say that complaint. Where's the complaints box here for this? where can you complain about these things? Are those spaces that are created right now where you can really and truly complain about things, that are happening on the ground? Just a thought.
Absolutely, such a valid thought. I think a lot about the bureaucracy and the systems of bureaucracy that we have set up in the Caribbean, and so much of it is a holdover from colonialism. I mean, doing anything with your bank in Trinidad requires however many affidavits to get anything done, and just how much that, like, from the regular day-to-day, middle-class experience down into community-driven, out on the front lines climate action work, and how hard it is to access those resources at the community level. It's really atrocious. We need fewer policies, we need less bureaucracy, and we need more action and resources. It's such a hassle. Alicia, what do you have to say on this?
Oh, I have so many things going on in my brain right now. Because
I want to hear all of them.
I was really excited by the last contribution, because bureaucracy is the bane of so many of our existences, right? Like, it's a nightmare working with legislation, looking at the Constitution. I think most people probably know about what the Bahamas is dealing with, trying to go through some constitutional reform, and it's just terrible because you have to take it to the people. And then people vote no, because they're confused or because of red herring issues. And it really makes me think about the need to bridge the gap between government and people, and moving away from this idea that the government is just there to do things for us, do work for us, and we just sit back after we vote and we're not involved in the process, and understand ourselves to be the government, and those people that are in parliament to be our representatives, and people who are supposed to be taking our issues there and advocating for us. Like, we should not have to be fighting them down, and we shouldn't be in positions of opposition. And when we're looking at gender equality and centering gender in everything that we do, we should not have a need for these policies, but the reality is that we do. I think in this moment, right, between bureaucracy and trying to get to a place of freedom and decolonization. I have a friend who had a podcast for a little while, and she called it the Ministry of Decolonization. She said if she had a position in government, like, that's the ministry that she would want to run. But while we're sort of in between, we need to get to a place where people are creating the policies that we need. And again, this is an area that Equality Bahamas has been working in for a few years. So one of the things that we did in 2020, right, on the heel, right when the pandemic had started, and we had been talking to the government, saying to them, look, domestic violence is going to get a lot worse. People are literally trapped in homes with their abusers. You have to do something about this. You cannot just have shutdowns, you cannot just lock down, you cannot just have curfews, and people have no way of getting to safety. Something needs to be done. We brought people together to develop a community-sourced set of recommendations to address gender-based violence. I think that's where we need to go, because these people that we're electing, they ain't got it. Okay, they ain't got it. They ain't living the same lives that we live. It's like they're in a different country. They're in a different world entirely. We cannot depend on them to do this kind of work. We have to be prepared to do it ourselves. And yes, I understand that there are people who are experiencing these things who don't have the time, who don't have the capacity. So those of us who do, like those of us here who are able to be in this conversation, to observe the conversation, to type into the chat, we're the ones who have to do that work and bridge that gap between the people who we need to amplify their voices because they can't do it, and the people who have the power to do the work, and recognizing that there is people power. And that's really what equality is about. That's what equity is about. It's about being a part of this process. It's about driving it. It's about being at the center. And when we get to that place, I think we'll know we're to that place when we don't have really convoluted conversations about periods. And it's not an add-on. We'll be at that place when we say, you know what, there's a lot of waste. We have issues with our landfills and with our dumps. So let's move away from tampons and pads. Let's move to menstrual cups that can be used for 10 years. And we won't have the but, because right now we have all kinds of buts. We have the but that is access to water. Why don't women have access to water? What's going on with that? The next but is the ick factor. Why are we being icky about what's coming out of our bodies? Why is that a thing? You have the money factor. I can't afford to pay $30 or $35 for a cup right now. Why can't a woman who menstruates once a month, or any menstruating person, because more than women menstruate, why don't they have $35 in their pocket to go and get a menstrual cup? In fact, why do we have to pay for period products, right? Like, these won't be add-on things because these are connected. Periods are connected to climate, right? Gender is connected to climate. So it shouldn't be odd to bring up a period in a conversation like this. And we all know we're there. We'll know that we're centering gender appropriately when period comes up in a climate conversation and people aren't like, what? I think that's an indicator that we could use.
Absolutely.
And sorry, I just want to say, Alicia, again, with all the tea and the gems, amen, hallelujah, joining the church or whatever sect, cult you have going, I'm in it. It's about these underlying gender norms and these post-colonial things that we're carrying over from way back when, like, yeah, I have a period. I didn't choose it, but guess what? It happens. I gotta go to work. Every time it's on, they say that period cramps are equivalent to heart attacks. I have heart attacks every month and we can't even talk about it. You can't even, no, I do recall when it was, I think we had the earthquake in Haiti. Maybe that was almost 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure. No one even considered that the women there needed sanitary products, needed period products, right? So if we don't disrupt these gender norms, if we don't disrupt these normative beliefs, if we don't disrupt some of these social identities that we're carrying from the colonial period, as a whole in the system, we'll never get to where we need to be, unfortunately. But I just want to say that I do support literally everything that you and Anita just said.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that last part, because that's actually how we got to the climate space, is following hurricanes. People have these donation drives and no one was donating and no one was calling for donations of menstrual hygiene products. So we literally had a separate drive for menstrual hygiene products. And I forgot to say, one of the other things that people bring up when we talk about the cup is that if you're at work, how are you going to deal with that in the restroom, right? If you needed to empty. So it's like, why are bathrooms designed that way? Why are they designed in this way? I have a major problem with the swing of the doors. Why are the doors swinging inward toward the toilet? Like, that just doesn't make any sense, right? So these are all things that are annoying, and you only think about it when you're in the moment. And you're just like, oh, it's just a thing that's getting on my nerves. But these are real issues that we have to address.
Yeah, and even sometimes when people send out these menstrual cups into disaster zones, assuming that that's, the sustainable alternative for these women who also don't have access to sanitation and water. How the hell are they supposed to use menstrual cups if they can't reasonably be expected to be able to wash it and clean it and reuse it?
And I wanted to raise something just so we come back to the post-disaster action, because even when rebuilding or when the disaster has already happened, what's the role of the private sector? We just expect the government to come and save us, but there's a very nice and healthy private sector in the Caribbean who should have the mechanisms to move donations around communities at the local level in coordination with municipalities. Are those mechanisms in place, or we still waiting for social protection from the government? And that is menstrual cups, condoms, medications, children books, shoes, toys, everything, food, liquor, because everybody needs liquor, and some nice rum bottle when you're recovering from shocks. Everything is needed. And I just don't see also the private sector in the Caribbean empower enough to do outside of little donations here and there. Is there a mechanism really set up between the government and the private sector that allows our diaspora? We have a huge diaspora living in the UK, in the States, in Canada, that really wants to help when we are in crisis, and they just can't find the mechanisms to send money to where it matters the most. And I think that's another issue. And so I completely agree. COPs, everything is connected. And when we recognize the interconnectivity of everything that happens with climate, I know the topic becomes very complex, very, very complex, but you just have to choose, like everything, like in life, you have to choose a niche, something that you're going to focus on. Because if you start looking at all the issues, you know, you can easily get paralyzed with no action.
Absolutely. Khadija, did you have any comments you wanted to throw into this round of fire commentary?
I don't even know what to add anymore. I feel like everything was said and articulated so well. So I'll just go and copy and paste hallelujah, amen to everything that was said, because I am in 200% agreement. The only thing I feel like I would want to add is also, actually, it's not even that deep. I was just gonna say that, you know, a lot of time when we think about women and equality and stuff like that, sometimes we ignore the disparities in the women's space. So like myself being from an urban center in Trinidad and Tobago, as opposed to someone from a rural, you know, our problems are very much different. The way flooding affects me definitely does not affect them the same way. And sometimes when you look at gender equality on a national scale and in broad terms, they tend to overlook some of these disparities. I really think that we also need to, you know, look at that as well when focusing on gender-centered decision-making and all that good stuff. And I would just say, like, when gender is at the center of everything, then it's what it looks like to me is us making decisions for ourselves. And that's it in a nutshell.
Amen. And one thing I think that you really highlight there too, from earlier comments from Alicia and Danny, I think around the intersectionality of this work is just the binary that gender equality tends to evoke, right? We're always thinking about women versus men when there's so many other gender expressions and so many other identities who are also marginalized and left out, and who we need to really consciously bring to the fore when we start to work in this space. So audience, I mean, I see lots of really great comments in the chat, but I see no questions in the Q&A box. So honestly, if you don't want this to just be me choosing what questions I want to ask, please drop your questions in the chat. Back to y'all panelists. I really like the idea you brought up just now about this Ministry of Decolonization. And I think about that in the context of how do we move forward as a Caribbean region? How do we address the traumas of the past of colonization? How do we work better together, you know, collaboratively across CARICOM, across the ECS, across all of our different regional bodies? What are some thoughts and ideas you have about this regarding decolonization and cross-Caribbean regional collaboration?
My thoughts is that we just need to do it. We here in the Caribbean, we need to do it. And that's not me deferring to governments, existing government, future governments. It is from spaces like these where we network, we build those connections. You just have to do it. I was having a conversation the other day about, you know, advocacy, and every time there is an issue or something comes up, people are like, okay, who's gonna do this? You know, what's going to be done? You have the expertise, you have the knowledge, you have the technical skills to have this discussion in a setting where we can get an action plan, deadlines, tasks, responsible people, whatever the case is. We just have to do it. It's something that's necessary. We cannot look to the north for them to come here and tell us what to do. This is not something that we're going to outsource for some consultancy or something. This is an issue that we're aware of. We've acknowledged it. We know, for the most part anyway, the impacts that it has had on our development and continues to have, because it's not a full stop thing, it's a ... So yeah, I mean, we as the Caribbean region, I'm not even going to say CARICOM, but as the Caribbean region, we have the power, and I've said this a million times before, to come together and punch above our weight, right? So here we are, Caribbean Women for Climate Justice, we have consultants, we have academics, we have technocrats, we have literaries, we have all the expertise that we need to be able to just have this discussion. If somebody say, oh, next week, Wednesday, we're going to have a meeting, 6 o'clock, we need an action plan, boom, I'm there. Free my calendar.
Absolutely. I think we do have to do it, but I also think we need to do some work in unpacking what it is. I think, a lot of the times we can feel in our lived experience the impacts of the history of colonization, but we don't really have the vocabulary to really identify where certain things are coming from. What do you have to say there, Kendria?
I definitely want to go back to what one of our lovely panelists said, where this is where private sector and NGOs come in. I am honestly not a fan of government doing everything. We see how that's been working out for us, and it's a horrible idea. We have governments that are centered around egos and are highly, in most cases, unqualified or lack the capacity to even take care of just the islands they're responsible of. So when it comes to regional collaboration, there are several regional organizations existing, and their impact is still yet to be fully felt. But I feel like this is where private sector and NGOs really step in. The NGO market throughout the Caribbean, and particularly here in the Bahamas, is very strong. They are on the ground, they're in the communities, they're talking to people every day, they're collecting real live data. And this is data that a lot of donors and stuff need in order for them to continue to support. So NGOs have that level of accountability that I think our governments have yet to achieve, and the same for private sector. And we need that level of accountability and transparency if we really want to see change within our communities and really get sustainable connections going. We spend months, hiring foreign consultants to create strategies, and then that strategy sit on a shelf and it collects dust, or we do a pilot program and then government change, and then the pilot program disappear and then nothing happened. What we really now need to create resilient societies is that continuous projects, those sustainable projects that can keep going. And I think that is where private sector and NGO really should put their foot on the ground and get those type of projects going.
Absolutely. I think you highlight I think Anati was the one who brought up this private sector point, and you're adding to that, Kendria, like the need for NGO collaboration with the private sector, because the NGOs are the people with that community data. And the government has a role still in, I think, regulating how things happen and protecting our interests to the extent that they are capable of doing so right now. Alicia?
Yeah, on the note of decolonization, I have to say that the Ministry of Decolonization, that's my friend and longtime advocate, Erin Green. So if anyone wants to look her up, she's notorious. But when we talk about decolonization, I think in the region, we have to talk about the CARICOM Committee on reparations and look at the 10-point plan, because it's really easy reading, and it's something that we need to be calling for as a people. And I don't think that we are giving that body sufficient support. I think we need to be a lot louder and a lot more consistent in the call for reparations, and understand that it is not a check for each one of us, right? It's about changing our conditions. And that's where we have to start, with changing our conditions. And we have to understand, like you said, Alicia, what does it mean when we talk about decolonization? We have to look at how colonization has impacted us, how it's impacting us every day, and make the connection between that and whatever space we're working in. So right now we're talking about climate and we're talking about gender. And when I think about both of those things, I think about the way that we express our gender, how much of that is choice and how much of that is because of what society tells us. And one of the ways that we express our gender, one of the main ways, is through clothing, right? So where are we getting our clothing from? How are we spending our money on clothes? How are we thinking about the way that we impact markets and the way that we have an impact on the way that other women in other parts of the world are treated and are compensated for their work? So are we contributing to fast fashion? Are we buying our clothes from a place that starts with S and ends with N that has stuff cheap? Where are we buying our clothes from, and how do we feel about it? But also, what are the conditions that have pushed us to buy clothes in this way, that we're not buying quality pieces that last forever? And what does it mean that we're throwing these clothes away every few years? Where they're not even good to use for rags because the material is so shitty, right? Like, how do we make these changes? How do we think about the way that we are consuming without guilting and shaming ourselves for being in situations of vulnerability and for experiencing poverty, because we can't expect people who don't have much money to go and buy, I don't know, whatever designer thing, right? But it means that to be responsible, to have an impact on markets and the lives of women all over the world, women who are working in sweatshops, right? Women who are producing stuff. What do we need to do to change our conditions so that we have the power, the dollar power, to buy the way that we should be buying, to impact the market the way we should be impacting the market, and impacting our own homes and landfills, right? Having like a negative impact on the landfills because we're buying things that we can keep, and we're not following along with these really stupid rules of colonization that say that we have to wear 3-piece suits to go to the office in 85-degree freaking weather, right? Like all of these things are connected and we have to think about it.
Listen, those dress codes to get to those government offices in the Caribbean are ridiculous.
Yes,
sorry,
Alicia,
go ahead.
Thank you.
Not to mention that it causes the AC to be low, like really low temperature. What's the impact of that on the environment?
Exactly.
Well, I have two things to add to that. On reparations, I don't want to go into that whole, how do you say, rabbit hole, because this is perhaps a whole different conference that we may have, we may need to reparations. But I have heard from people from these countries that should be paying that, saying, we pay you reparations. It's our programs, it's our international aid. That is reparations. And, without getting into the debate whether yes, no, whatever, it is true that when we are asking for reparations and we have to talk about climate justice because somebody has to pay for the bill because we are getting in debt to recover, when then we have to spend on trying to rebuild and become more resilient, and then we're going into debt. And on top of that, they're not giving us more money because we are in debt, because we're in debt based on a problem that they generated in the first place. So for us, it's a vicious cycle. I don't think there's enough conversation about really how reparations, for example, can be connected to climate justice. So we become and bring a plan of, all right, you're going to pay for this, but you're going to pay for this so we can build the kind of sustainability lifestyle that we need to build in the Caribbean. And that is connected to the way we consume, the way we transport ourselves, the way we build our houses, the way we consume food security. Everything is connected to that lifestyle that we need to build in the Caribbean, because we are not going to, be participants of the Industrial Revolution. That already happened. That's why these countries are so developed. They already took our allocation of development. They already took it. So now we are, challenged with developing with limitation of resources. So we need to build a lifestyle. And that is something that, for example, a Ministry of Decolonization, in my mind, could tackle. How do you build that resilience culture and vision in countries in the Caribbean where everybody is completely aware of not only what is climate change, but what is your role in that problem, and what can you do to bring solutions that are beyond recycling. It's beyond that. It's beyond, oh, I'm going to plant a tree. No, it's not that like that anymore. It's good, yes, please do it, but this is becoming a lifestyle. I remember there was a climate conference with President Bush from the United States, ex-President Bush from the United States came in saying, yeah, we understand the problem, but we are not giving up our lifestyle in the United States. We're not gonna give up our malls, we're not gonna give up our AC, we're not gonna give up what we do, which is not gonna change our lifestyle. So what does that mean in the Caribbean? What kind of lifestyle do we need to have in the Caribbean? And what can we strive for? And how can we connect the subject of reparations, the subject of international aid, the subject of climate finance to the lifestyle, to develop that lifestyle that we need to have? That's a big question.
So true. I think reframing reparations as quite literal climate debts that are owed to us is really important, but even beyond the financing aspect of it, what are we doing for our processes, our lifestyles, our policies, the way we interact with the world? We often talk about the Caribbean being the place of, really low impact on climate change, yet being so deeply impacted by it. Yet we also have such huge problems with pollution. I think, many of our islands lead the world in pollution per capita, and we need to really think about those systems. Why is our public transit not really built out properly? Why does everybody feel the need to own a car in the Caribbean? Why can't we get around? Why can't we get from island to island more easily and effectively? And then your point about lifestyle as well, Anity, like I love the fact that you brought that up so many times. Climate justice advocates and environmentalists are seen as people trying to bring us back to the Stone Ages, or they want us to, reduce our quality of life in order to be sustainable. But that's just frankly not true. It's all about revisioning this work of climate justice towards building a world that's even better, building a lifestyle that's even better than the really extractive one that we live today.
And I'm going to add something really quick that may provoke more debate. Is our environmental movement in the Caribbean, has it, advanced and evolved to what we need to tackle now in uncertainty with climate change? Do we need to also rethink our advocacy to environmental issues? Because, things are moving in different directions, and it's not only about creating opposition to the government, but also, bringing that perspective of, all right, you're doing things wrong. How are you supposed to do them? And our environmental movement in the Caribbean has been, historically strong, but I think it has lost momentum. And that's something that we perhaps need to talk about too.
I definitely agree with that. I think for the amount of environmental groups and for the amount of educated professionals who've been contributing to international reports like IPCC and all the others for years, that it's not translating into environmental knowledge or awareness throughout our populace. And I fully cannot get the disconnect. I know, as a young environmentalist, I see that there's a disconnect between who is sharing the message. So typically here in the Bahamas, if you are a wealthy environmentalist, you cannot be speaking to Black Bahamians who are struggling to put food on the table about the environment. So there's a disconnect there when it comes to social connections or even just understanding human perspectives. But for me, I could never really understand why we cannot get the level of environmental awareness that we need for simple things like respecting closed and open seasons for fish, or just, not putting your trash on the ground, just simple things we're still missing on. So when it comes to talking about climate change and climate justice, that is well over a lot of our people's head. And to get them to really understand that you can't do it from a government office, or you can't do it from behind a TV screen. You literally have to be on the ground and talking to people so that people feel the real connection between their existence versus the issue. So yeah, I definitely agree that we need to do more when it comes to making that environmental connection much more personable.
Thank you for that. I think someone earlier highlighted the need for more forums, more space for people to talk like this one. I'm going to let you jump in, Alicia, and then I'm going to get to Dainalyn's question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to that, what Kendria just said, it's also having an understanding of why it should matter to me. Because you could talk to me about the birds and the trees all day, right? But I'm not that into animals. And I like houseplants well enough, but why should I care about forest? You have to make it matter to people. We know that we're having a conch issue, right? And Bahamians love conch. But when you start explaining to them that there will not be conch, you won't be able to eat conch. All of a sudden, there's a shift. People are like, oh, so this is a real problem. I need to be paying attention to the size of the conch. Maybe I should start eating it a little bit less. Of course, you have the people who say if it's going to disappear, I need to eat more of it now while I can. But that's the kind of thing that we need. We need to understand why it matters to us, because I think we consider ourselves to be separate from the earth. People talk about the earth and it's it's tree huggers, it's animal lovers, and that doesn't matter to me. I just want to be happy. But tell me how I won't be happy in 10 years. Show me on a map how our islands are disappearing. show me what it looked like 20 years ago versus now. And that's what we don't have. We don't have that sort of like tactile understanding of what's happening, because the science terms, I can tell you for me, mean nothing to me. I don't get it. But you have to connect it to people's real lives. The same thing for gender issues. People don't get it until you say, hey, when your baby's born, sir, wouldn't you like to spend more time than 5 days? That's why we need change to the Employment Act. You have to make these real connections.
And just quickly to add, I think the big part of that is that we're not enforcing laws. And I think that's a big problem throughout the region. We write strategies and policies and revise laws, but we're not enforcing them. So there's no real consequences for people to do things. So yeah, there's no level of respect for that environmental rule or the level of protection that the environment does give us naturally for climate change.
Yeah, or we waste our time enforcing really outdated laws, like police out in the forest burning cannabis instead of dealing with these actual problems.
But you have to also consider that in order to enforce, laws, you need resources, and for a government, getting resources in a country that is in high debt, where do you get the resources from when you have this, this amount of budget? I know it's not a justification, but it's part of the problem because we're in high debt, and that's why I also despise the whole thing about, you're going to give us finance based on economic indicators when it should be based on vulnerability indicators. We are, we don't get the finance because by our how do you say, our reality of vulnerability. That's exactly why we don't get the finance, because we're vulnerable. And then we don't get finance, and we have to put on our own resources, the resources of our people to rebuild. And then we don't get the money to invest in environmental protection, in education, in health, in gender mainstreaming. And then you see the pandemic, that also compounded all the issues that we have. So I think without, bringing a dark cloud on this conversation, there's still a need. Yes, there's a need to create more spaces, but we need to bring politicians to these spaces. We can talk for days, all of us, for days, but we need to bring people that are not particularly in this space to listen to us.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick, like 2 seconds before you go to the question. I just want to touch on the whole environmental advocacy movement that is existing but not really thriving in the region, and say that I feel based on my experiences and like with the work I do with young people in Trinidad and across the region on a whole, is that lack of representation. And the fact that, like, when I saw this conference come out and I saw so many speakers, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, who are half of these people? I don't know them. This is great. Like, I want to connect with some of them, but for a lot of people, like, we are not seeing ourselves in some of the environmental movements that are taking place. So we don't know that, hey, this is something that I can do. Like, we all know about Greta. I'm not her biggest fan, but we all know about Greta, right? But if I ask you to name like about 10 environmental activists, youth activists in the Caribbean, you start to struggle. Or maybe you know some in your own backyard, but you don't know those that exist on some of the other islands. So I think that representation and that need to bring these people forward is so important in helping build our environmental advocacy movement in the region, as well as moving away from all these global north definitions. Sustainable development, that definition was not created by us for us. And we're trying to fit ourselves into these global north models, and we're not achieving it. And it's because we are not taking our context into reality when coming up with some of these solutions, these buzzwords, these definitions and stuff like that, and moving forward and not moving forward at the same time. Okay, that's my 2 cents in a nutshell.
No worries. Thank you so much for that. I know we never have enough time for these conversations, but I do want to address a couple of questions that we have from the audience here. And I think it really connects what all of you are saying, like, where do we go from here? How do we build out these spaces and better advocacy? So Dainalyn is asking, what's an outcome that you would like to see blossom from this particular conversation, from this particular conference? We have this Caribbean Women for Climate Justice justice thing. How do we build this out? And then to Reggie's question, how do we connect that to COP15 on biological diversity, or even the UN's CSW Commission on the Status of Women? How do we build this out in the Caribbean, and how do we connect it internationally? Don't all go at once.
Everybody just looking at each other. You guys take this one. I'll follow.
I'll go real quick. I think what I want to see happen beyond this space is more imagination. I think we spend a lot of time sort of articulating the problems and the challenges that we have and the reasons why we can't. And I think that we need to get outside of the box of our current reality and have a space for boundless thinking beyond what exists now, beyond the limitations, kind of think in a way that is, day zero. Like, we haven't had light yet. It's day zero. What do we want to create? Let's focus on that first. What can exist? Like, what ought to be? And then how can we make that be? How can we make it so? I think those are the questions that we need to start with, rather than trying to fix these problems one by one, and just open up a space for creativity and innovation. And then I think as we've been talking about, make the connection between some of these things that we're facing right now and our current practices, because our practices, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, they have origins and they have reasons, not all of them good. And if we can recognize them, the origin, the reason for our practices, then we can figure out how they are also instructive to the people who come after us. And I think that kind of shows us the gravity of how our actions and our behaviors and our practices have consequences way beyond us, so that we can think about what those new practices need to look like, and use them as indicators for a new reality.
I love that.
In my case, I think I'm going to put on my Ithaca hat and take advantage that my co-founder is here on the audience, and say that coming out of this conference, we want to network with all of you. We want to see how to find opportunities in which we can work together and bring the expertise that you have into the projects that we have. We're working with open society foundations to support community disaster risk reduction plans in Providencia. And that's something that we want to transfer to other Caribbean islands or other coastal areas where that kind of best practices or adaptation plans or disaster risk management practices can be transferred to. And in that, we don't know it all, so sometimes we struggle to find gender experts, people that can really bring those perspectives like the ones that you brought, Alicia, and really give us that kind of expertise. So whatever we're working on the ground is really informed. So for us, we really want to do that kind of networking, connect with you all, and not leave it at words, but really involve to the extent possible in projects and actions on the ground. I think that's something that I would really like to see out of this. So I'm looking forward for the networking as well.
Absolutely. I hope everyone joins us for tomorrow's networking session for the conference. Over to you, Dani.
Okay, I also want to continue this network and, as Alicia said, get creative in some of the outcomes that we hope to achieve from these types of fora that we have. I have some maybe background marketing experience, and in terms of translating this to COP, movements mean a lot to me, and they're something that it's easy to join a movement because typically the messages are very clear and you can relate to a particular message when it's out there. So when you think about Black Lives Matter, when you think about Stop Campbell, when you think about no more fossil fuel or whatever the case is, you join that movement because whether it's a tagline or the core values that are related to that particular movement you identify with. Save soil, I see one there from Reggie. I think in terms of what we're taking to COP, we might need a movement. you know, and I guess that's where the networking and, you know, coming up with what the messaging might be for that is, you know, whether it is decolonize or we want reparations or whatever the case is. And then we need to get it kind of as a unified message across the Caribbean for what we're taking. I know that it's representative governments that are going there, but when that one hurricane moved from the coast of Barbados straight across to Jamaica, you know, it's literally similar impacts that we'll all be having in terms of, you know, disaster risk and recovery and that kind of thing. So I want to see more movements. We spoke about advocacy. I want to see more movements, more unified movements coming out of spaces like this where we rally for the cause and, you know, we get it on an international platform and stage and we make noise and we get media attention and all of that. That's what I want to see. That is how we're going to start differentiating the Gretas of the world from the Kendrias and the Anites and the Alicias and everybody else here in the Caribbean, because our voices are important. They matter.
So well said. Over to you, Kendria.
I wouldn't mind her 1 million, but okay. I agree. I always try to live off of the mantra to take up space. I think there's so much elegance and knowledge, not only on this panel, but throughout the region that have not had the ability to find their voice or to use their voice in ways that it could be valuable to the community. So it may be that some of us enter politics. It may be that some of us become Gretas and be completely obnoxious and shouting to the rooftops the change that we need. But sometimes you need that, right? I think one of the things that the environmental world or even the climate world has not fully used throughout the region is technology. The same way that we're holding this panel discussion, one of us can be on some other country's news doing an interview tomorrow, you know what I mean? And to Danny's point, I think creating a movement is exactly what we need. And it's also a way to get the public more aware or educated as well. I am not a fan of these big international global meetings because it is then that our politicians somehow start to understand that we are in dire need. And then that dire need dies as soon as they take off their three-piece suit and come back to the islands in which they were, you know, elected to government. So I think we need to be obnoxious, be Greta straight throughout the year, to be honest.
I love that so much. Khadija, how are you gonna round us out here? What do you wanna see come out of today and into the world?
I was just be the Greta's interested. that stuck with me. But not okay. I'll move off of that. How do I see us? Well, definitely, I love the movement. I definitely think we need a movement. There's so many of us operating in silos, and we all fighting for the same cause at the end of the day, which is climate justice in a nutshell, right? And what sense does it make if, like Danny mentioned, you know, a hurricane is not going to know Barbados from Jamaica. Something that's, you know, a heat stroke or increase in temperatures is not going to differentiate between Trinidad and Dominica. It's going to affect all of us collectively. So it's only right that all of us collectively come together and develop a solution and move forward, right? And through a movement or through using our voices, through storytelling, through all these different actions, through connections, like connecting with you guys, connecting with some of the other panelists and understanding the different perspectives that exist. And because there's some things that were mentioned today that I didn't even think about. And it was because that was not my reality, or it was a different perspective that I just could not even fathom, you know? So it's only through this whole regional cooperation and then understanding each other's needs collectively, then I think that that would be the best way to move forward. Strong women, gender equality, all those good things at the forefront, at the center, and just amplify our voices the best way we know how.
There you have it, people. That's the roadmap. That's how we're gonna do this thing. Thank you so much, Kendria, Khadija, Danny, Alicia, and Aniki for joining us today for this fantastic conversation. You know, I want to send some thoughts out to Joshua, who couldn't join us, and think about, you know, our internet access in remote communities, but also the indigenous women also leading this work in the space. Thanks so much to Durval and Christine of the Climate Conscious podcast and the Breadfruit Collective for convening us. And I'm going to hand it right back over to Durval now.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you, ladies. Wow. That's all I can say about that panel. Oh my gosh. And I loved the energy. You know, I stand here as a proud Caribbean woman, and I'm so amazed. And from the discussions, one thing that stands out is that we clearly need an established space. You know, two of the objectives of hosting this conference are to, one, initiate a regional alliance of partners and key actors in the climate and gender justice space, so that we can have a network that could influence both public policy and actions. And we also wanted to initiate a database of stakeholders so that we can really maximize, you know, the outputs of our efforts. So I'm so happy to hear the interest in, you know, moving forward in that movement, because as was mentioned, we need a model of development, a model of sustainability, a model of resilience that is for us and by us. For too long, we have been importing strategies that do not work for us. They do not work well, you know, so, and we have the capacity, we have that indigenous knowledge, we have well-educated, we have brilliant minds, we have, again, indigenous knowledge that we just need to tap into and really utilize it to solve our problems. So we have started something here with this conference, and I think it would really be a shame if at the end of it all, we just go our separate ways. So I'm really excited to know that there's interest, and even from our panelists as well as our attendees, in maintaining this network and seeing it evolve into what it can become. So I invite everyone to stay with us in terms of staying connected as we build this movement and see where it can go. There are a lot of persons doing things in this space, and we're not going to attempt to duplicate any efforts, but it's all about optimizing our efforts so that we can realize the benefits for the region. So with that being said, I want to thank the panel so much. Anaiti, Dani, Khadija, Kendria, Alicia, and Alicia, our moderator. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and bringing your passion to Caribbean women for climate justice. We do have a poll for our attendees to give us feedback, and we will wrap today's session with a performance by another Caribbean climate advocate, who I'm proud to call my friend, Miss Dainalyn Swaby, who is a development communication specialist and climate change advocate. In her professional and volunteer roles, she has developed and supported several climate-focused youth engagement campaigns and research projects on a local and international level. She's also represented Jamaica and the Caribbean, sharing country experiences and participating in climate change fora globally. A 2019 Chevening Scholar, she holds a master's in global communication and development from Loughborough University, London. She enjoys packaging environmental issues in engaging and dynamic content forms, such as animation, short stories, and spoken word pieces. So we will now have Ms. Dainalyn Swaby to deliver a spoken word piece for us.
Thank you so much, Derval. Good evening to everyone. Well, greetings, because I'm not sure where everyone is across the Caribbean, taking it for granted that you're all in the region, but of course you're from the region. It had been a blessing. Let me say it's a blessing, you know, being in a space with everyone of like-mindedness. And wait, not hearing me? What? Can you hear me? Maybe I the wrong earphones. Are you all hearing me? Can you hear me clearly?
because that's my superpower, my loud voice, my loud mouth. I've gotten in trouble for it a lot of times, but it's what makes me me. So I was just saying, it's remiss of me not to mention, how powerful the sessions were. I've been in and out of the conversations ever since the series started. And I'm just proud. It makes me proud to be Caribbean. It makes me proud to be in a space where, stepping into climate advocacy, climate engagement, a lot of times it's important, but at the same time, it's a struggle because the people who we represent often cannot relate to it. And on the ground, on a day-to-day, living their day-to-day lives, it is a moving goalpost to push the importance of climate considerations. And now we're opening the conversation, looking at gender and its impacts of, gender and how it interrelates to climate change, and which is, another uphill task, but we're getting there. And I'm happy for this movement. I just heard Derval or somebody else saying that we need established spaces. And I was like, listen, the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice is an established space, and I'm happy for that. Now, the poem that I'm going to do for you, because this series is also in celebration of Earth Day. 2 years ago, when we were just going into lockdown or in lockdown, I wrote this poem on reflection on Earth Day, as an ode to Mother Earth, when we realize the impact of COVID and being in and how it is that the environment seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. So here goes. It's called Tick-Tock, Nature's Clock. I wrote a poem for you today, Earth. Love letters to you can never be enough. Love knows no bounds, but maybe we've loved ourselves a little too much and pushed past our boundaries, your planetary boundaries. Now, we've gotten ourselves in quite the mess. In my culture, we say, what a pricky. To the rest of the world, what a pickle. It's time to confess. Whether we did it or they did it, we're all in this mess. We write countless poems with such flair, such finesse. We strike, we hike, we hold meetings, make commitments that seem fleeting. Get into the real actions, we feel somehow under duress. Climate change means more than recycle. Recycle paper, recycle plastic. How about recycle purpose? How about reuse and repurpose the same tired words and make new meaning? While the blanket around the earth gets thinner, let's remove the blanket around our words in defining action. Many messages moving throughout media. While TikTok challenges circulate throughout the day, Tick-Tock, says nature's clock, slipping into the fray. Tick-Tock, as a small farmer now struggles to sustain the land which sustains the man and the woman. Tick-Tock, as the fisher folk has to take stock of the stock they can no longer take. Tick-Tock, pipes run dry, the eyes of nature flooding with tears, flooding us with fears. Tick-Tock, move your opinions off social media and into that ballot box. Let's take a pit stop. Stop thinking this is just a science situation. Forget those fancy meetings. It's not all about international relations. This is more than good weather versus bad weather, but whether we can finally come together. Men, women, and children, this is everybody's business. Matter of fact, how are you running your business? Let's talk about youth and women getting a seat at the table. We need everyone doing what they're able. We've seen in recent times we're more than capable. So I'm writing a love letter to you because now we remember what we've forgotten. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dainalyn, for that impactful piece. Tick-Tock, for real, for real. As we mentioned earlier, we're literally fighting for our lives, and the clock is running, and we definitely need to take meaningful action. So thank you again, and I see you're getting a lot of love in the chat. So as we wrap today, I want to thank everyone for joining us for the 3 of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference. We had such an amazing discussion from panel 3 all the way to panel 4, and of course, that very thought-provoking movie screening, which I think touched everyone in terms of our vulnerability and what resilience really means. So I take this opportunity to invite you all to join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. EST For our children and environment segment, we'll also have another movie screening, and then we have our networking session, and we conclude with our wellness session and then our conference closing. We'll send you an email with more details, but please look out for the link to join tomorrow. And you can tell a friend to bring them to our final day of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference. So with that, I say thanks again for joining us. We really do appreciate your presence and your active participation. Thank you for all your contributions and your good energy. It's been amazing. And with that, I bid you a good evening. Be well, everyone. Bye.